expect their tools to get better and better and better. So by the end of their 10 years for the Hudson's Bay Company, even though the company complained bitterly about their skills, many of them went away as being quite well-skilled blacksmiths. The last blacksmith here, James Taylor, was a skilled smith when he came to the company. They hired him because he already had skills, because they needed someone to reliably make beaver traps. This was the nightmare of Hudson's Bay Company blacksmiths. They loathed beaver traps. And I'm projecting here, but I can tell you why, because they had never been trained to work with steel like I'm doing with this knife, because it's not the shaping, it's what we're going to do after I finish the shaping. It's the quenching, which hardens it, and the tempering, which makes it durable. And spring has a very particular, it has to be treated in a particular way. The company had forgotten, obviously, that their blacksmiths didn't have this skill, or they expected too much of them. Because they in the first years when they adopted this, and they didn't adopt it till early 19th century, they'd been using snare wire for a century and a half. It had worked well, but they thought we can make more money doing this. So they adopted this practice, and they said, had the blacksmiths made them, and they made them by the thousands, and they broke by the thousands. So, and there was endless correspondence.
What year did he finish?
I'm just about done. So you can see, I'm not referring to any pattern here. I'm just forging as we go along. It's going to be a little bit longer handle. That's okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
Because it's by practice, and as you've seen their axes and things that they've made, everyone would look pretty much the same, but there'd be slight differences in them as they would come. But the nice thing is that nowadays when you buy a knife, it's one size fits all. If you have the blacksmith make it, you can adjust the handle or whatever to fit that hand that you need. So there you can see, I need to move this thing over this way a little bit, so I'm going to heat it up a little bit more. That's the nice thing about being a blacksmith, is that you can adjust it again and again. And not just now, but if you bring it back to me 2 years from now and say, hey, needs to be a little bit shorter or a little bit longer, the blacksmith can do it. Once it's done here, doesn't mean it's done. Blacksmiths reforged tools again and again and again. In fact, that's the mastersmith's job. That's my job here, is it's called dressing the tools. It's to constantly keep them in working order and to make them. That's what blacksmiths were. They're tool makers, making tools for themselves and everybody else. And depending on their level of skill and their level of focus as a smith, they would be making, blacksmiths are the generalist, making everything and not focusing on any one thing. And then you could also you could specialize and make single things as well. If you find a master that would be happy to teach you those things. That's the right shape. I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to actually let it normalize and cool for a bit. I'd just like to do a little bit of, actually I can do hot filing. I want to file this a little bit before I quench it, because just because I always complain that blacksmiths must have hated filing, because I hate filing. But I don't think that that's probably the case. They had to do a lot of it. It's called cold work most of the time. This is really, in my opinion, why you have apprentices in the first place. But I am missing that best tool of the blacksmith, the 8 to 11-year-olds, who I could have do all of the grunt work that I don't like to do. If I did a lot of fine file work on all of the pieces that I made and took off the scale while I was filing them, they would no longer call me a blacksmith. They would have called me a whitesmith, because I'm doing the more fine finish work. Blacksmiths were the generalists of the tool makers. They're making your everyday farm and work tools. And you can see that I am still aware that that is still very hot. I know it's hot because you can still see the temper colors that are coming up. So all of those colors that you see when you pull your roasting pans out of the oven, those beautiful things, if you think, oh wow, that grease has gotten on there, that's not grease. That is the color that iron and steel makes at various temperatures, and what it shows you is where it stopped cooling at the various temperatures. The hottest are in the blues, and then it switches to this purple, and then this yellow, and then comes out here. So this is quite cool. This is kind of moderate, and this down here. I really actually want the whole thing to be about that golden color, but not until after I quench it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip this over, just file this edge a little bit to give it a little bit of a profile, and then we're going to finish the knife as the blacksmith would have, with the to make it hard, not too hard that it doesn't hold an edge, or that it, not too hard that it just breaks if you use it, but not too soft that you have to keep putting on an edge every time you cut a few potatoes with it. And the gauge of what's the right temperature at which to do this, how long to quench it for, would have been a matter of just doing it again and again and again. This part here, these technical kinds of things, being trained as a blacksmith, you really just have to repeat. And if you don't get it right, there's a couple ways that you can tell. If you don't get it right, you can just heat it up and do it again. So, if you have a forge, of course. Magnet here as my measure of how hot the material is, because I just want it just hot enough so that the blade is not sticking to it, and that's just almost sticking to it right there, which it doesn't look like it's very hot. And the reason I don't want it any hotter than that is because it will slow down how fast it cools. So if I have something at 3,000 degrees and I need to bring it down, say beneath 400 degrees, or let's just say 1,300 degrees, and I want to bring it down to 400. That's a huge gap to cover, and if I plunge it in the bucket of oil, it'll rapidly cool a few hundred degrees and then it'll slow down. But it's the threshold that it reaches when it loses its magnetism that I want it to pass quickly. So I want it to be just above this temperature so that when I put it in the oil, it instantly drops below that, and that's what gives it its greatest hardness. It's not because it was really high temperature and then made really cold. It's because that it moved past a threshold, like a trap door, poof, that it falls through, that makes it hard. And the faster you go through that trap door, the harder it gets. So that's probably good enough right there. Yeah, that's good enough. So we're going to put this in here, and I'm just going to put the knife in for a second. Let's pull it in and out a little bit, and then I'm going to plunge the whole thing in here. So I'm making a choice by doing this knife in oil, because it's not going to be as hard as it could be, but the oil is kind of cool. But nor is it going to be super brittle. So it will hold an edge in between, but I also know that if you put a little bit of pressure on it to the side, it's not going to ting like your really good Japanese chef knives, which will cut like a dream, but if you put any pressure on them, they'll just snap in half. Because they're so hard, hold such a great edge, but they're not meant to be used with any sideways motion to them. So this quenches the knife. And there was a couple ways that I can temper it, because now that it's been quenched, I probably want to heat it back up a little bit just to take a little bit of the brittleness out. And if you watch any of the shows like Forged in Fire, well, specifically Forged in Fire, you'll know that lots of people plunge this in a bucket of oil and pull out a giant flaming sword, which is called flash tempering. And anybody who is actually selling something to someone would never want to do that, because it's risky. It's really risky. It's risky because you don't know how much each element is being heated up. For me to temper this, I can do it much better than the Hudson's Bay Company blacksmiths, because I have a toaster oven. So what you do is you just put it to 450 degrees, stick it in the toaster oven for an hour, and then let it cool down till I can touch it. And you pull it out again, stick it into a toaster oven for an hour, pull it out and touch it. And then it's done. Then it's done. This way, with the flash tempering, I wouldn't be sure. But there's another way. My other way is, I'm just gonna clean this off, is I'm gonna clean it off here, and I'm just gonna heat it in front of the fire, and we're gonna watch to see if those colors come up. And that's what we'll give it. And then, if you have access, you can always use quenching cracker. I'm just looking for a cloth to clean this off with so that I don't have to use my clothing, which is a last resort. I frequently do. Just gonna get after me at for here. Let's see. Oh, good. Let's put it down. I do not want to knock that bucket of oil over. Just put it on the ground. I often tell people my name is Danny, the chatty blacksmith, but the truth is also it's Danny, the clumsy blacksmith, which is not something that you want to hear your blacksmith say when they're wielding really hot materials in front of you. The metal. Because the color that I'm looking for as the metal heats up is different in different lights. And if I'm working things that are really hot, if there was bright sunlight on there, I might not even be able to see that those coals were burning. They could look black. So a blacksmith is looking for a really uniform kind of color when they're working. And again, if this was a blacksmith's knife, which is the way I'm making it, this is exactly the way I do it. Usually because I'm trying to do it fast, I usually don't even put a handle on it, just because you need a knife quickly. So this is the tempering. And our phrase, hey, you've lost your temper, comes from this process. Because what it means when you lose your temper, typically is because it's been heated up too much. It's, and I'm going to quench this in oil here, or in water at this point. It's because you've been heated up too much, and the metal has gotten soft. And when it gets soft, it loses its temper. And the edge of that might be a little bit softer than it is, but you can see, we'll see if we make it a little bit scape. Yeah, grips a little bit more, just a little bit more. So there it's finished, and you can see the temper color that I've gotten there. It went a little bit blue on the end, but that should be fine because it's not too bad, and there's still a good edge on there as I'll grind away. So the last step here is to grind a rough edge on it. This gives you some idea why Hudson's Bay Company blacksmiths were not asked to make knives. If I wasn't chatting, it would probably take me about 15-20 minutes to make this. But even 15-20 minutes is a long time to make one piece like this. You really can't have the blacksmith doing it. A good cutler or knifesmith is making these, probably making a dozen in that same period of time, one after the other, that they're just forging out, because it's going to be the same number of hammer blows, they're going to have the same stock, they're going to know everything that they need to do this again and again and again. So. Now, I always regret not having the motor for this tool, which again is that 8-year-old or 11-year-old bullet. The grinds on knives historically were not the same as the kind of grinds that we get on really good knives nowadays. They'd be similar. Oftentimes the grinds used on historic fur trade era knives was called an apple seed grind, which just kind of has a very round edge. They were real durable big camp knives called dags that they used for. When you go into the storehouse there and look at the kinds of things that are there, the kind of knives that they sold, you may look at them and go, wow, this looks a lot like a kitchen knife. It doesn't look much like a camp knife. And that's because that's what they were selling. They were selling knives to trappers who were processing carcasses. They weren't using it as a camp knife, they're using it for butchering and for cleaning those furs. So that's the kind of knives that they needed to have available. They're not really providing tools for people to settle here. They don't want people to settle.